Byron Murphy was my favorite defensive player in this draft. I thought he had a chance to be the first defensive player off the board. He lasts till pick 16, Pete. He's headed to Seattle.
You mentioned Murphy is so talented. And remember, Mike McDonald comes from the Baltimore Ravens. You know who dominated that defense last year? Justin Madubuike. You know who they compare him to? Byron Murphy.
But he can play the run, and he can definitely rush the passer inside.
This Seahawks team with this draft class and Mike McDonald looks like a true contender in my eyes.
You know, you guys, I'm just going to go ahead and jump straight into the Seattle Seahawks at this point because I really do think this team has put together a good offseason so far, and they've not only been able to get better on the offensive side of the ball, but also on the defensive side of the ball. They were able to add a bunch of free agents that are going to come in and have immediate impacts, and on top of that, they added a bunch of rookies that I like a ton that I also think are going to have an immediate impact, which is why I believe this team is going to be better than they were last year. And man, if these additions do turn out to be what I think they're going to, on top of Mike McDonald now calling the defense, this team could become one of the scarier teams in the NFL pretty quick. But before we get into why I believe that, if you like Seattle Seahawks content just like this, make sure to go down and hit that subscribe button so you don't miss any Seahawks videos for the remainder of this offseason. Okay, so to get back on topic with the Seahawks, this team, of course, is coming off a season where they finished 9-8 and they didn't find themselves in the playoffs. This was obviously a bit of a disappointment considering they expected to improve on what they did last year where they also went 9-8, but obviously they stayed the same, which is not what you want to see year to year. This ultimately led them to moving on from Pete Carroll, and even though Pete Carroll has proven himself to be one of the best coaches of all time, I do think he was starting to get old and a little bit outdated, which is why moving on from him made a lot of sense to me, especially when you consider that the coaching market for this offseason was one of the best markets we've ever seen. It was kind of a no-brainer, and now that they were able to actually hire Mike McDonald as their head coach, it looks even better to me. He's going to come in and bring in a great culture, in my opinion, and really change around this Seahawks organization for the better. And with what we saw him do in Baltimore last year, I think he really is going to turn this Seahawks defense into one of the best defenses in the NFL. But you can't just have a coach to make that happen. You've also got to have a great roster, and that's why the Seahawks went out and tried their best to improve their roster this offseason, and that starts with what they were able to do on the offense. The Seahawks, in my opinion, had a pretty good offense in 2023, and they definitely had the talent at the skill positions. They were just lacking at the offensive line. So in the draft, they went out in the 3rd round at pick 81 and drafted Christian Haynes out of UConn, which I think was an absolute banger of a pick. Christian Haynes is probably the most natural offensive guard in this entire draft class, and he showed us that throughout his entire college career. He hasn't had any injury concerns over the entirety of his college career, considering he started 49 straight games, and he's also just a really, really good player. He's pretty athletic, and you see that on tape with the way he's able to hold on to blocks and the way he's able to move in the run game. And I really do think this pick is going to come in and immediately have a great impact on this offensive line and ultimately make this team a lot better. I think the fact you're able to get a guy like this in the 3rd round is absolutely unbelievable value, and it's exactly what the Seahawks needed to add to this offense. And then to add on top of that, you also went out in the 6th round with pick 179 and took Satoa Lamea out of Utah, who's another great interior offensive line prospect, especially in the 6th round. He's one of those guys that played tackle in his senior year of college, but he's going to bump into guard in the NFL due to having shorter arms, and I think he's going to come in and actually be pretty solid at the position. I know it's a 6th round pick, and you can't expect too much out of these later round picks, but this really was an A+ pick in my opinion with what he brings to the table, with everything he's able to do, and considering he's pretty athletic, which gives him a decent upside. So with those two additions to the offensive line, I'm a lot more confident in what they could potentially bring to the table, especially if they can stay healthy throughout the season. And when you pair that with everything else this offense has, and the fact that they hired Ryan Grubb, the offensive coordinator for Washington over the last 2 years, this offense is going to see a lot of improvement. You of course still have one of the best receiving trios in the entire NFL, with DK Metcalf being your number 1, putting up great production year in and year out, and considering he's only 26, he's only going to get better. And then you have the older veteran guy in Tyler Lockett, who even though he's getting older, still is playing at a high level and still has that speed that can get you down the field. And then finally you have the rookie you were able to take in last year's draft, and Jackson Smith-Njigba, who showed a ton of flashes for what he could potentially be as well, which like I said makes up one of the best, if not the very best trios in the NFL right now. And then to add to that, you also have a great weapon in Noah Fant, and you drafted a guy in the 4th round in AJ Barner out of Michigan, who I think is a sneaky good pick pick at the tight end position that could also come in and have an impact and have some production in year one. So I love their weapon group overall, and I think Ryan Grubbs is going to be able to do a lot with that. But what is really going to take this offense to the next level is being able to run the football, and as long as you have Kenneth Walker healthy, that is going to be the case. Kenneth Walker is one of the best running backs in the entire NFL. I don't care what anybody says, and at just 23 years old, this guy is just now getting started, going into his third season, and when he is on the field, this Seahawks offense is completely different than when he's not on the field. Zach Charbonnet is a great running back as well, and I love him as a player, but he just isn't as good as Kenneth Walker, and he can't do it all by himself. So when both of those are combined is when this Seahawks offense is at their full potential, and that's when they really start to get scary. So I really do think this offense has the potential to be a top 10 unit next year, if not even higher, and if they can be that, they're going to be a pretty scary team because this defense is going to be a really good unit as well. To start, we of course got to talk about their first round draft pick in Byron Murphy, because I don't think anyone would argue against him being the best interior defensive lineman in this entire draft class for good reason. He is an absolute athletic freak at the defensive tackle position, and when you watch him on tape, he just absolutely blows by interior guys because he is just so much more powerful and so much faster than them. He's so explosive, and that is going to pop out in the NFL in day one, I guarantee it. And even though he might be a little raw as a prospect, he still has some pretty good pass rush moves that I think are going to be seen on day one as well. He is the exact type of player Mike McDonald needed in the middle of this defense to be able to run the defense like he wants. And man, oh man, with this addition, I'm starting to really like what this Seahawks team has to work with. You're adding him to a defensive line that I'm already pretty confident in because they have boye mafe on the edge, they have nwosu on the other edge, they have Jarran Reed, and they just signed back Leonard Williams, another interior defensive lineman that is one of the best in the entire NFL, which makes this defensive line not only have a great starting lineup, but also have a good depth lineup that they can rotate in to keep everyone's legs fresh. This is probably the most important part of a defense in my opinion, and when Mike McDonald has pieces to work with on the defensive line, he is able to simulate so many pressures because of it, and I'm telling you, that's exactly what we're going to see happen. And then when you move back to the linebacker room, you did go out in the draft and get a guy in the 4th round in Tyrese Knight out of UTEP, which is a pick I like a decent amount due to the energy he plays with. This is the exact type of player that Mike McDonald wants on his defense, and I think he's going to pair pretty well with what they already added in Jerome Baker and Tyrell Dodson. I think those two guys are a little bit slept on as players, and they don't get the credit they deserve, and I think Mike McDonald, just like he did with the linebackers in Baltimore, is going to be able to use them to the best of their ability. And when you combine that with the secondary, this is when this team really starts to take a turn for the better. You have Devon Witherspoon, who absolutely broke out last year as a rookie and was exactly what you drafted him to be. You have Tariq Woolen, who's an absolute athletic freak, and you have that guy Michael Jackson, who I think is a pretty solid corner with all things considered, which makes up one of the best corner trios in the league, just like you have one of the best receiver trios in the league. And then on the back end, man, you went out and you signed Rayshawn Jenkins, who is a big addition in my opinion, and you had that guy Julian, who played really well for you when he got his opportunities last year, that I also think is a guy Mike McDonald is going to get the best out of. I think what all this means for the defense is that they're going to be pretty good, and if you pair that type of defense with the offense the Seahawks have built out, there's nothing else for me to say other than I think this team really can be a sneaky contender.